Thank you, Caroline, and welcome to our How to Measure Outcomes seminar. How to measure outcomes is a question we asked ourselves in 2006, and little did we know it would take us about 7 years to answer it. Our outcome story began, I suppose, when we started working with the Child and Family Research Unit at NUI Galway in 2007. And I suppose we were a little bit naive at the time in thinking that we could have one measurement tool that would effectively measure our outcomes and really, I suppose, deliver to us that result of, what difference we were making. And I suppose as this caption probably kind of summarises really, we weren't quite sure where we were going on our journey at this stage, but we were going to keep on going. And I suppose one of the lessons we learned very early on is that there is no magic formula or all singing, all dancing outcome tool that we could have. That very much that it is not possible to effectively measure outcomes unless you have some key structures in place. And I think that early work that we did with NUI Galway very much laid the foundation for what we have in place today. So just looking at that and what we have in place, we have services based on evidence, and we very much use best practice evidence in the field within our services. We have a very clear vision and strategic direction, and this was very key to us, I suppose, before we could really answer that outcomes question of knowing where we were going, who we were as an organisation, what our objectives were, and what we hope to achieve. We have high quality accessible data that allows us to know the client. And I suppose what I mean about knowing the client is, it occurred to us really very early on that while we had a lot of information, like a lot of organisations, a lot of statistics, a lot of data, how much did we really know our client? And I suppose, we asked ourselves, what is the profile of a typical ISPCC client? What was our client cohort last year? What was it the year before? And what can we expect it to be next year? And I suppose it was then that we started to really look at, the data and how we were looking at our data and how we were, capturing that and the key data that we needed to have, whether it was such as the level of need, whether it was looking at, the types of children that are coming to us and the types of issues that they were coming with. But I think that ability to know our client really, helped us on our way in looking at how we were going to measure the outcomes for the particular client groups that we work with. I suppose we had started on this outcomes journey, and we had started with this new outcomes language. And we were kind of getting together with the inputs and the outputs and the outcomes, etc. But we really needed to be able to translate that message to our clients. How do we, bring that message and speak that common language to a client? And one of the key things very early on that the staff would say to us, when I talk about a goal, a 7-year-old thinks a goal, it's totally different what we think of. So how can we get that language? And we'll talk a little bit more about the outcome evaluation tool later, but I think that became one of the key challenges we had when we were in the working group, was I never thought there was so many different ways you can ask a question about psychological resilience or social support, and being able to get that language across really in a way that is child friendly, but also captures, the difference we've made. We've a standardised documentation system, and this very much ties in with when we talk about having the accessible data. Because as you know yourself, we can have lots and lots of paper versions, but the data is only as good as what you can do with it, and that how you're able to analyse it. We moved to a standardised documentation system. Now all our client files are on our CRM system, so we're now able to look at individual client files within the region. So anybody in any office, any of the managers for that region can look and see the client files. I think it just makes it much easier, but it's also great time, much more time effective for us. We have appropriately trained staff and volunteers. And I think this was something that we came to a decision a number of years ago, when we were looking at the training our staff had, and we made a decision that all of our staff would have a minimum of degree level qualification. And I think it's this staff base that really helped drive the changes that we have in place when we were developing our outcome framework. And finally, we mentioned about the outcome quality framework. This is something that has been ongoing, and it continues to be ongoing. In the last year, we have done a lot of work on redeveloping our practice standards. And this is something that we're looking forward to next year, in that every year that we go, the learning is to develop, and looking at, I suppose, putting those standards in place and saying these are our standards, and basing them on where we are now and seeing how they will help to, I suppose, continue to improve our services. I suppose the last thing, and last but not least, I suppose we've always listened to the voice of the child. But what we very much try to do is to really bring that and integrate that into our work in a way that's very meaningful, but also that allows us to measure outcomes as well. So moving beyond not just the satisfaction and clients being satisfied with the service, but really capturing that voice of the child and the parent, and more recently, the stakeholder as well. So I suppose, what outcomes are we trying to achieve? Well, a lot of our work, as I say, when we were looking at our strategic direction, our vision of saying what is it that we do, and we have three main outcomes that we have. So increased social support, increased psychological resilience, and increased self-regulation of behaviour. I suppose one of the key, with social support, I suppose they're quite common terms, but I suppose we see that as, I suppose, the very bread and butter of support. It's those reciprocal acts of support that happen within families every day. Psychological resilience, I suppose it's that innate ability to overcome or to minimise the damaging effects of adversity. And in the self-regulation of behaviour and emotions, I suppose it's that ability, the ability of a client to have insight into their behaviour, to understand their behaviour, and to look at new ways of approaching difficulties and being able to problem solve. As you can see, we have, I suppose, in ISPCC, how we refer to this as I have, I am, I can. I have trusting relationships, I am a worthwhile person, and I can solve problems. But rather than me speaking, I suppose, further about that, let's just see what our young people have to say.
I have trusting relationships.
I know my parents will love me no matter what.
I have role models.
They let me know what's good and what's not.
I know there are rules at home and what I can and can't do.
I can communicate.
I can talk to my friends and share my feelings.
I can seek trusting relationships.
I can find someone I trust to help me.
I can problem solve.
I can manage my feelings and impulses.
I am loving and understanding.
I am filled with hope, faith and trust.
I believe that I am safe. I am proud of myself.
I don't let anyone make fun of me or tease me.
I respect myself and expect others to respect me.
Okay, so that was just, I suppose, our young people, just giving you, I suppose, just a greater understanding of the whole I have, I am, I can, which is very much tied to our outcomes. So if we look here just at the table here, and you can just see, I suppose, our three outcome areas of I have, I am, and I can, which are linked. And you can see here, I suppose, on the right-hand side, we have a number of standard evaluation tools that we use in order to prove our outcomes for these key areas. This is very much based on the work that we did, that initial work with NUI Galway, when we looked at, I suppose, there were so many tools out there, and it was about, I suppose, one of the key bits for us was to see what was a good fit with our services, what would help us to, I suppose, capture those outcomes for our clients. So, for example, in the area of social support, we have the social network questionnaire, the social provision scale. In the area of coping ability and psychological resilience, we have the Rosenberg self-esteem, the adolescent wellbeing scale, and the parent-child relationship inventory again. And then in the area of psychological resilience, we have the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, and again the parent-child relationship inventory. And I think it's these three, these standard evaluation tools that I suppose give us that measure of what we're doing, and they're completed with each client or parent at the baseline and follow-up stage. I'll speak about the outcome evaluation tool in a moment, but just next, just to mention individualised programme planning. Now, all of our clients who come to us have an individual programme plan, which involves an assessment, goal setting, intervention plan and evaluation. And it's in that really that I suppose it's that one-to-one approach. And we talked about the relationship, and Helen mentioned that there as well. And I suppose it's that whole sense from right at the first point of contact that we have a client with the client, right through to case closure and beyond, when we remain in touch with clients through our tracking system. So that whole plan, I suppose, it's the whole voice of the child, it's the voice of the family, it's also the voice of the stakeholder as well within that. I suppose one of the key things is that no one tool can effectively measure all our outcomes. And it's the staff clinical opinion that I just want to really draw attention to here. An evaluation tool, and it's one thing that we've really emphasised right the way through over the last 7 years, an evaluation tool can give us so much information, and they have proved really instrumental to what we do. But it is, at the end of the day, a tool. And it will never, I suppose, supersede the staff's clinical opinion and their knowledge and expertise. So I suppose what we look at, it is the staff's opinion that will analyse and interpret the results so that we can come to a definitive conclusion and identify the concrete evidence of change that exists within that. When we look at, we'd mentioned earlier about the outcome evaluation tool, and we've Neil Hopkins here, who from Viewpoint here today, which we mentioned earlier. But I suppose when we were looking at developing what we had, we always had paper version tools, and then we had what was very much a client satisfaction tool that we were using online. And last year we really wanted to look at, developing that client satisfaction further into an outcome evaluation tool. And we were looking very much, at what model could we do that? And I've spoken there about our outcomes and of social support and psychological resilience. And how do you, ask questions to a young person, to a parent, in a common language they can understand that about the outcomes in these areas. And we really wanted to look at, how we can actually draw that out. Because some of the key work in ISPCC, it's not just the hard outcomes, those changes in behaviour or an improved school attendance, which are very important. There's also, those very much those soft outcomes of the learning and development effects. And also, the whole changes in insight and changes in attitude. Because sometimes with our clients, it's those changes that we will see first. And we may not necessarily see the behavioural change till later on, or maybe not at all. It might be if they're re-referred to us and then we'll look. It depends on the pace that the client is working at. So we just look, at a practice model of this. If I give you just a practice example of how this might work, of the Kirkpatrick model. And the model that we chose in the end was the Kirkpatrick model, which is very much, looks at the effect of an intervention on 4 different levels. So we have level 1 is the reaction effects. And if I take an example of, say, a parent who refers their child to us, say, with a behavioural difficulty, a young child. So at the end of that work, we might have that parent will say to us, I liked the service, I'm very happy with it. I had a great relationship with the worker, maybe even that she smiled now and again. We can very much get that sense that yes, you were satisfied with that. That's a level 1 effect, and that's really good. The person liked the service, and they may well use that service again or feel more positive about using other services again. If, however, that parent says, I now understand why my child acts the way he does. I now understand how my behaviour impacts upon my child. And I know a little bit more about how I could manage my child in different situations. We can see there that that's a learning effect and very much a level 2 development, whereby that the parent has gained some insight into it. If, however, the parent says to us, I now understand how my behaviour is impacting on my child, and I understand that if I slap my child, he's actually becoming more aggressive. And I can understand that my behaviour is impacting on him, so I will no longer slap my child, or I will no longer use shouting as a parenting tool in order to manage his behaviour. And if the parent says to us that my child no longer acts out in temper tantrums, that he's no longer using aggression himself and perhaps modelling that behaviour, that he's now able to, go into a group and to play, well then we can see very much that there's a behavioural change in that situation and very much a level 3 effect. And finally, if that child then goes on into play school and that child is able to play, to be able to get on, to be able to interact, becomes more ready for school and is able to move into the school system without difficult behaviour, and you have a parent-child relationship that isn't damaged, that is actually quite strong, you can see there, what we have is what we'd call like the multiplier effect, that rippling effect out into the community of an indication of a longer term benefit. Looking at the OET now, as we call it, the OET, the Outcome Evaluation Tool, and we are looking for, a more child-friendly name for this. So if anybody has any suggestions, please come forward. But at the moment it's the Outcome Evaluation Tool, which is the name that we came up with when we were on the working group. And very much, I suppose, I just want to give you an idea really of what does it look like when a child and parent, I suppose, log on to this. Now, as we've said, it's an online tool and it's based on an ISPCC system. So children it's a self-interviewing tool, but it can also be used with an audio version. So the questions can actually be read out to the child. So sometimes that helps for some children if there are literacy issues, but also some children just prefer it, rather than seeing the task of reading, that they actually prefer that it can be read out to them. So I suppose some of the features here, there's an assistant here, which you can see to the right, and the young person can choose which assistant they like. And I suppose I see this very much as the warm-up part of the exercise, that if we're asking children to give their feedback, to give their opinions, and this is at baseline within the first 4 sessions, so we're very conscious it's very early on. So often this kind of part can be the kind of warm-up where the child can pick their own assistant. And you'll notice there as well that there's a number of different backgrounds. So we have the rural scene, we have the football scene, we have the city scene. So sometimes we might have children living in rural locations will pick the farming scene, or we might have the race car, etc. So it just, I suppose, gives you an idea of, I suppose, that whole sense that children are able to, I suppose, customise it to themselves. It is a self-interviewing tool, and I suppose we're very aware that, you know, children might not be honest. Parents might not be honest in the same way, in the face-to-face way. So it's not, I suppose, going to solve all the issues. But we do know that while people might be nervous about being honest to us, we also know that people are far more likely to be honest if they feel that they have ownership of what they're doing, and if they can complete the feedback independent of the worker, that they feel they can somehow go into it and actually give their own opinion to it. It certainly seems to make a difference. So if we look now at, I suppose, just some of it, just a typical question there. Did your ISPCC mentor ask for your views and opinions? And I mentioned earlier that we've just redesigned our practice standards last year. And I suppose one of the key things we wanted to do is, when we were looking at, I suppose, doing our quality frameworks and the outcome measures we have, is to try and tie as many different things together. I suppose to make it, I suppose, easier, but also that we could really look at outcomes right across on all different levels. So one of our ones there, did you ask for views and opinions, is one of our key practice standards. And so what we've done is we've taken some of the key questions from practice standards and we've integrated this into the outcome evaluation tool. So I suppose it allows us to capture those opinions that otherwise, unless we went out and did a survey with clients, it's very hard to know, I suppose, when we're doing an audit of, you know, well, how well are we doing, what's our compliance rate, and overall, how can we improve quality in this area. You'll see some of the other features there. You've got the customization bar. So that's where the young person click on that. As you can, the wording now might be a bit small for you to see there. But like you've got the assistant, there's different, they can do the theme, they can do the colour background and all that. And as I say, look, the questions are the same. I suppose the content is the same, but it's just that warm up, that sense of, you know, I've ownership of this. And what we like to say to children, that yours will look totally different to anybody else's. If we give it to 100 children, each screen will look different because you'll have done it individual to yourself. And it's very much saying, and your responses are individual as well. They're from you. And I suppose it's just capturing that. And you can see there then that the child can just click on the answers that they have there. I suppose rather than me speaking, I suppose, further about our outcomes, I just want to give you, I suppose, a sense just from our young people and what they think about the services. And this is just a clip just from one young person who was referred to us by her parent.
When I first got in touch with the ISPCC, I wasn't exactly sure what it was that they actually did. I had this complete different other image in my mind, but it was actually having spoken to some of the other organisations about what I felt that Katie was, or I had witnessed that Katie was experiencing. When I finally got in touch with the ISPCC, I found that they were actually perfect for meeting her needs. Within about 20 minutes of speaking to them on the phone, I realised they were just meeting absolutely everything I needed for Katie, or what I thought that Katie needed. So when we started actually coming along to the ISPCC, I was quite happy to just sit back and take a back seat. They actually took her and chatted away and showed her ways of how to speak about her feelings, and that it was okay to feel what she was feeling or what she thought.
When I came in on the first time, I just felt a bit nervous, but then but then it's turned out good for me, and then ever since I went into it, me and the person who looked after me, we used to talk, and then afterwards we would usually play a game or draw something. When I was talking with them, I felt real happy just to say my feelings out and just to get it out of my mind. Whenever I'd come home from school the odd time, I'd write in my feelings journal that they gave me. Whenever I was feeling sad or happy and just something to talk about, I just write that down, and then just give it to my mom. So then if I was feeling sad, she would make me feel happy again.
I found the feedback process the whole way through was absolutely fantastic. Midway through, there's kind of a questionnaire to see, do I actually notice any difference? And I could honestly hand on heart turn in and say, yes, I could. It was very much like a journey. And as a result, our input into that system to make it a smooth journey was very much, I felt, was very much valued. Because otherwise, I don't think it would have worked half as well as it did. You know, I think if they hadn't asked us questions or they hadn't allowed me to turn around and say, God, I can really see a difference in her. And to be able for me to verbalise it as well as her, you know, I thought was just, you know, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
One of the things that I really loved about the ISPCC was they just took me in, looked after me, and then they just gave me my personality back, and it's just like going to the end of a rainbow to see a pot of gold. That's just like the thing, just to go here and just be yourself again.
I can honestly hand on heart say that coming to the ISPCC at a time when Katie certainly needed it, and I needed as a mother to be able to source that help for her. It has definitely been one of the most positive influences in our lives to date. Now, I mean, there's been loads of stuff over the years, but I can honestly say I have my daughter back, and she's not afraid now to talk about how she feels. She's more conscious of how she affects other people, how not to be afraid to be a kid, first of all, and to not try to be something that she's not as, and look after me, you know what I mean? She is definitely back to the little girl I knew and absolutely love more than anything. And I think for that, I'll always be grateful to the ISPCC. It's been possibly the most positive thing in our lives.
I love the ISPCC.
And I suppose we really just wanted to show that clip today, because I suppose we've talked a lot about standard evaluation tools that we have and about our online measures. But I suppose when we look at that, I suppose it brings us back to, I suppose, where a lot of us all began, which was in practice. And before we had any online measures, and before we had standard tools or anything like that, we had the skills we started out with in practice, which is observation. And I suppose when we look at that clip there, you know, we very much draw on that, and we talked about the clinical opinion and the importance of that with the staff actually be going out. And when you look at I suppose, observe what's actually happening within the clip. And I suppose if you look at the outcomes, in a way, they possibly just kind of jump out at you. And I suppose, is it the way that where Rose has held Katie's hand and has actually, I suppose, that indication of an improved parent-child relationship? Or is it the way that the child looks at mum and smiles? And I suppose that sense of reinforcement that the parent is now happy. I suppose that sense of that stronger bond. So I suppose it just ties in with the fact that sometimes, you know, we still draw on those whole facts within our individual programme plans of using the skills we have of observation, and that remains key. I think it also, I suppose, sums up that it's a complex area, that measuring outcomes, it is complex. And as I say, there is no one way to do it, but it is very much a combination of a number of different things we talked about earlier, such as our standard evaluation tools and the outcome measure, and the different opinions such as the child, the family, the stakeholder, and also our online tool. So it's very much, I suppose, what we have learned in our journey, that it was far more complex, I suppose, than we thought it would be a number of years ago. But it is very much, I suppose, when you can pull in the different factors that are there, it certainly makes, I suppose, the task of looking at producing effective outcomes much easier. Things like empowerment and active participation is key, and I think that's key within it. And I suppose that clip there, I suppose, summarises what we try to do, in the sense that parents and children have to be active participants, and in a meaningful way. Because I think the whole sense of us involving children and having participation is one, again, that how can we do that meaningfully? And that's why I suppose when we talked about having this, I suppose, what we call the common language, but it's a language that we can all share, and that we understand what we're trying to achieve with this child and family. The key thing there, I suppose, is making a difference. And we talked there earlier about the model that we use, the Kirkpatrick model, and we talked about the different levels from satisfaction all the way down. But I suppose, yes, everybody likes feedback. Every organisation likes to say, yes, we like ISPCC, we enjoyed it. But I suppose what we're really aiming to do is to make a difference, to move beyond that sense of that, okay, yes, you liked it, but how can we now prove that we've actually made a difference? And that's what we're aiming to do. And then finally, I suppose, the relationship, and that came up in Helen's presentation, and it's very much, I suppose, fundamental all the way through. And I suppose we know that from research that up to 30% of the therapeutic, the outcomes arise from the strength of the therapeutic relationship. It is absolutely key, and I think it's not really possible to produce effective outcomes with a child and family if we don't have that relationship. And I suppose, to me, it just makes me think, really, I suppose, what the government are trying to do at the moment with the junior cert, moving from a state examination system to a process of continuous assessment. Because within ISPCC, we very much see ourselves, I suppose, as being under continuous assessment from the first point of contact right the way through to the end. So it isn't just this standardised evaluation tool right at the end that gives us the measure. Right from that very first contact, that first phone call, we're building that relationship. And it's just the importance of maintaining that relationship right the way through in everything that we do. And finally, I suppose we began as a child-centred organisation. We remain a child-centred organisation. We haven't become an outcome-centred organisation, but we are firmly outcomes-focused. We always put children first, and we're always here for children.